So I'm going to do a demonstration of a basic cylinder on a wheel. The first thing that needs to happen is that your ball of clay should be a nice, even, round shape. Best not to start with like a crazy shape like this that's really hard to center. It's way easier to make it round. And then also it's very important to start with a round shape here down, as opposed to like a concave area that's going to trap a bubble underneath what you're trying to throw, which is also no. So if you can get it in a general round shape, the easiest way to make it so that it doesn't have any pockets to trap air is to roll it like this and make kind of like a dull cone, and then just kind of splat it onto the center of the wheel head, and then get it going slow. And I'm not going to immediately launch in with water and lubrication and pushing and pulling and speeding up, because I want to spend another minute or so getting this as close to centered as possible just by smacking it. And I'm not like smacking over here and then smacking over here and then smacking from both sides. I'm just staying in one spot and allowing the wheel head to turn the clay for me. Just like every other process that should be done on a wheel. At this point, I'm going to add a little bit of water and then start the centering process. And I'll demo that real quick before I actually explain what's going on. Gather it up a little bit. And then everything that I'm going to do to this piece of clay throughout this whole process, I'm going to probably need to add water to it because it's kind of dry. It's been sitting in a bag for a while, so what I'm doing now is gathering it up, and between my two hands I can pretty much eliminate any of the inconsistencies on the sides, and if I bring them all the way up, then I have just a little teeny inconsistency sort of bobbing up and down on the top, which I can then smush down by pushing it back down. Now, the basic way that this piece of clay is manipulated for this first stage called centering is with both hands, wheel turning counterclockwise, so that I'm right-handed, and so my right hand is going to ride on top, left hand is going to ride on the side, and from about here to here I'm gathering up and controlling the clay from here to about here. And then with this hand in here, I'm from the wheel head, from my pinky sits on the wheel head and is gathering up all the way up to here or so, all of this clay here. So between my left hand controlling the outside and my right hand controlling the top, coming around into my hands like this, I can really get it nice and centered. But there's some really sort of like, it takes a little bit of strength to manipulate a piece of clay, but it's more finesse than anything else, and pushing and pulling in just the right amount. I've seen big strong men complain about little hard pieces of clay and that they're not strong enough, and I've seen videos of little old ladies manhandling a 50-pound pile of clay with no problem because they know how to work it. So if I get it pretty close to center like this, like I would go ahead and start throwing this. I'm going to explain what's going on first. If at whatever point you get your piece of clay centered with pressure onto it, you have to let go of that pressure very slowly. So I'm backing off pressure, backing off pressure, backing off pressure, and then I can let go. I cannot launch into this, get it centered, and then just be like, woohoo, I centered it. No, it's not centered anymore because I let go too quick. When I'm pushing on it, I'm actually pushing it off center as it turns, and then as I let go of it very gradually, then I ease it into the actual center of the wheel. So once you get your piece centered, next thing you have to do is to open it up in the middle, and the way that I like to do that is usually by doubling up a pair of fingers. I go in with my middle finger, but some people like to use their thumbs, some people like to use two hands. As long as you're getting into the very center of the piece of clay, and I typically like to make a little divot like this, like a little pocket, and I put some water in there. And you don't do this part very fast, so the water won't sling out. Once I get that in there, I know that this process will be lubed for the entire way in. So I opened this up, and you want to be very careful to not let the twisting motion of the wheel to twist your fingers up like this. You're really only pressing at about 7 o'clock, not really straight down into the middle. So once this is open like this, you want to try to check the depth or the thickness of the bottom. And at this point you can also get some of that excess moisture out of the inside. I'm going to check the depth of this bottom down here, and it should be, depending on the size form that's going to be thrown, this is probably 2 pounds of clay. I get a decent size, like really decent size mug. I can see the way that this went down in there. It's about that thick, which is just about right. Big huge thing would obviously want a thicker bottom. This is good for this form. So I'm going to open up the bottom so that the the inside bottom is to the diameter that I want this. So I have to kind of know before I even start to pull this thing up what I want to have, which is sort of a good general rule of thumb for anybody making something on a wheel. So I'm going to open this up to be about 3 inches across on the bottom, and then come straight up from there. And what you do, I'm stabilizing my right hand with my left hand, and I'm just going to, it's almost like I'm going to just, with just this, with my fingers, push back towards myself as it's spinning and open this up nice and slow. And I want to try to get my fingers to ride nice and horizontal towards the, according to the wheel head, parallel to the wheel head. So another really good step to take, you can kind of look down in there and see my finger marks. A really useful step at this point is to get in with a wooden rib that has a 90-degree corner and just clean that up really nice and flat like this, and that compresses the middle and will hopefully prevent any S cracks from forming. But I'm ready to start pulling this up, and what that means is that my left hand I'm going to be reaching inside, and with my right hand I'm going to be reaching outside, and together they'll pinch like this. And usually when I'm starting, I like to have my hands touching like this so that I have a general idea as to how far apart they are from one another, my fingertips. But I'm going to gather up some of this clay on the inside and on the outside, and I'm going to slowly, as the wheel turns, pull this up. And notice I'm not going super slow, and I'm not going as fast as the wheel can possibly go. You got to kind of for yourself figure out what's a nice comfortable speed, and then as I get closer to the top, I'm using less and less pressure. And with one pull, you can kind of get it probably about half of the height that you want to have. If you have a lot of clay to work with, you can get a lot of height out of one pull. Now, as it progressively gets thinner and thinner and higher, each pull will produce less height gain. And it's sort of like the law of diminishing returns. The more times you pull on something to get it higher and higher, the less you're going to get out of each pull, and the more likelihood you actually have of wrecking what you're working on. So I'm going to do another pull, and I'm doing most of this gathering from the outside and just sort of like countering the pressure on the inside to keep it from collapsing inwards, because I want to keep that bottom that I made with my wooden rib, I want to sort of preserve that. Sometimes when you're throwing cylinders, they have a tendency to kind of flare out at the top, so I'm making really sure to keep it directed inwards as I pull it up. Another thing that you can do if your piece starts to flare out, if you don't want that, is you can do what's called collaring or choking, and I'm just sort of really lightly squeezing with water on the piece all the way up, and I can reduce the diameter and circumference of that upper portion really easily and kind of rein it in, keep it from getting too large. So a really good thrower that does this for a living, or like a strawberry pot company or something like that, can make a nice big pot and get it as big as he or she wants for it to be within about 3 pulls. Usually I take anywhere from 5 to 10, depending on the complexity of what I'm trying to make. With this, I'm going to try and hold myself to 5. That was pull number 3. Another thing I just did that I didn't point out is after that last pull, you may have noticed I went in and did this, and all I'm doing is using this little delicate flap of skin in between my fingers like a chamois. Some artists use pieces of leather draped over the edge. Some people like to use their sponge, and really all that does is keeps the rim from cracking apart or flaring out or getting too thin. It compresses that clay on the edge there. I got a little water down in the bottom I'm going to dig out of there. Alright. Always, always, always make sure that no water accumulates down inside, because that'll wreck it after you put it on the shelf. It'll turn to a mud puddle and maybe even collapse. So this feels like it. This may be my last pull. This is pull 4.
Mrs. Papaleo, please call extension 2578. Mrs. Papaleo, please call extension 2578. Thank you.
So this went well. This is a decent sized cylinder. I would probably trim a little off of the bottom if I was making something that I was going to keep out of this. Right now I'm just trimming off. I'm trying to clean off the excess water that was built up on the outside. Excess water always causes problems, increases drying time, makes things hard to handle. But at this point, this is generally done. Now I can do a bunch of different stuff to this. I can make it big and fat like a vase. I can make a spout at the top. I can make facets like flat spots on the sides with a wire tool. So this is kind of the potential beginning to a bunch of different types of forms that you can make on a wheel. Obviously I couldn't make a bowl or a platter from this point, but a bunch of stuff is possible. I'm going to cut this off with a wire, and then what we're going to do is dissect this thing from the bottom up to check to see how good my pulling was. Usually when you're pulling stuff off of the wheel like this, you want your hands to kind of be dry, and it's best for the outsides of your piece to be dry so that you don't slip and you can get a decent hold. But what we're looking for or hoping for is that the thickness of this is relatively the same all the way down and across the bottom, which will keep from any drying cracks from happening or lessening the chance of that, as well as it'll fire a little more evenly. Let's see. So this is pretty good. I would be alarmed if there was like some really thick areas down here. People that are just learning to throw oftentimes find it difficult to get that big like blob of clay off of the bottom and get it to actually move up. But this is essentially what you're looking for. If I was just going to throw a straight cylinder, I would have maybe tried to pull it a little thinner, but this worked out relatively well.